The revolt against surveillance has gained enormous support from internet users and was backed by Edward Snowden himself. Many websites and human rights groups across the globe are joined together in the so-called Reset the Net campaign now, aimed at promoting a spy-free World Wide Web. Users, developers and content providers are being urged to use spy-resistant software tools. Let's cross live to Jesslyn Radic, the National Security and Human Rights Director at the Government Accountability Project in the US. Jesslyn, nice to see you again. We spoke last October, wasn't it? Do you think the authorities will eventually be held accountable for spying on their citizens, or is it just a thing all governments do? Where do we stand on that this day?
You know, it's hard to know. Right now, the USA Freedom Act in Congress has been watered down significantly by the House of Representatives, but I'm hopeful that in the courts, we may see some justice. We have one judge, now that these cases are finally going through, one judge that found the program to be likely unconstitutional. In terms of people actually being held accountable, that's another question. People seem to be resigning and stepping down and reshuffling. But in terms of people actually being held accountable for many of the atrocities that occurred after 9/11, that simply has not occurred. But in terms of reigning in the surveillance state, I do feel more hopeful about that.
So is the average individual, a year on from when Edward Snowden first made his statements and released this information, is the average individual any safer? Is there information about them any safer?
I think the average individuals are doing exactly what Mr. Snowden predicted, that if the government doesn't take care of this, technology will. And so many people I know are now encrypting information and taking other precautions in the search engines they use and learning how to use encryption and how to protect themselves. So I think people are taking care of it. People are making changes, and corporations are making changes too in their own policies and trying to protect information, trying to publicize national security letters and that kind of thing, more transparency.
Even countries as well, I guess. Some countries considering creating their own networks now to put a wall between them and Washington. But I guess that kind of undermines as well the whole very concept of the internet as a global unifying platform. It's quite sad, isn't it?
It is. I don't like to see the balkanization of the internet. But at the same time, if Europe wants to build its own fiber optic cable to escape the claws of the U.S., I mean, the fact that if you send an email from Pakistan to Libya, that it all has to go through the United States. I can see why most of the world, after finding out what the U.S. has been doing with that information, why people want to create their own technological infrastructure within their own country so they have their own apparatus. I don't think it'll necessarily quash the global community that the internet has allowed us to create. I certainly hope not. It's been one of the true beauties of having internet available in this generation today.
OK, a year on, let's look back. Let's talk very briefly about Edward Snowden himself. We mustn't forget him. He's, of course, here in Russia at the moment. Now, when you were last here, when we last spoke in October, you actually met him. To this day, he says he's not going to stop whistleblowing. He's promised more leaks. How much more can come, do you think?
You know, according to Glenn Greenwald, who is one of the reporters to whom he gave information, and Glenn is on a book tour right now, he said there are a lot more stories and a lot more information to come out. Snowden himself doesn't have control over what stories come out, on what topic, when, and by whom. So really, it's up to the journalists who have this precious cache of information to put those stories out that they believe to be in the public interest.
Jesslyn Radic, thanks for being with us, National Security and Human Rights Director at the Government Accountability Project in the US. Thanks for being on RT.